And today we are celebrating the phenomenal Julia Wong Kcomt. Can I get a round of applause, please? Yeah. Turn the energy up a little bit in here. And to start us all off, I'd like to bring up your host for the evening. This person has been absolutely remarkable. She reached out to us months ago with this idea, or the idea for this night, and has been fantastic and phenomenal from the jump. She gathered all the readers, and she kept us, me and Fabiana, our programs coordinator, honest and direct. So please put your hands together for Jennifer Shyue. As a translator from Spanish, her work has appeared most recently in The Margins, The New York Times, and Lit Hub, and has received support from English Pen, the Fulbright Program, the Cornell Institute for Comparative Modernities, the National Endowment for the Arts, Princeton University, and the University of Iowa. Her translations include Julia's poetry collections of Blind Salmon and Viceroyalties, and Augusto Higa Oshiro's novel, The Enlightenment of Katsuo Nakamatsu. She can be found at shyue.co. Please put your hands together for Jennifer Shyue.
Thank you all for being here. It's so exciting to see all your faces and to be in the space together to celebrate Julia Wong Kcomt, who is an incredible writer, poet, person, friend to many of us who you'll be hearing from tonight. So I'll start off with a little bit of an introduction, and then there will be a video. And then, I guess I'll orient us a little bit. I'll start off with the remarks, and then there will be a video of Julia in her own words. And then each of our three participants will come up and read a little bit, and then we'll all sit up here on this iconic green couch and talk a little bit about Julia, her work, our work, and then open up to you guys. Julia Wong Kcomt was one of the most vibrant people I've ever known. All of us who are going to be talking tonight can attest to her infectious energy because we knew her as a friend, as a fellow artist interested in our shared Sino or Chinese diasporic roots, as a mentor, as a writer we admired. Julia was a poet, a narradora, a novelist, an essayist, a gestora cultural or cultural organizer, and founder of multiple poetry festivals. She was someone people would cluster around after her talks and readings, magnetized. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a lover. She was possessed of a vivid and playful style, both literary and sartorial. She had strong opinions she wasn't afraid to tell you about. She was a polyglot who spoke Spanish, German, English, and Portuguese. She went to Lisbon for the first time a week after her friend Carlos told her she might like it and fell so in love she decided to move there. She was a native of Chipén in the north of Peru, and a longtime resident of cities in Argentina, Germany, Peru, Portugal, Macau, and Mexico, all places where she leaves behind people who loved her. She was Peruvian and tusán, which is a Peruvian Spanish word that comes from the Chinese tusán or tosan, meaning local born. She died in March, too soon, of cancer. We're here today to celebrate her legacy and honor her work by reading it, hearing it, talking about it, reflecting on how it reflects through our own work. I want to thank Mohammed and Fabiana at the Asian American Writers Workshop for hosting us in this beautiful space that I've adored since I first stepped foot in it 6 years ago now. I want to thank Fabiana, Nilton, and River for all the work they've put into tonight's event. I also want to thank the fine folks at Tusán, the Tusán collective of which Julia was a founding member, who made a very lovely Spanish language version of our event poster. Thank you to Julia's family who gave us their blessing to host and share Julia's words at this event. And of course, I want to thank all of you for being here, joining us in person and on the line. So people on the line, saludes a nuestros amigos en el Perú y por todo el mundo que están por Zoom con nosotros. The title of this event is La Piedra Angular, Julia Wong Kcomt and Transnational/Translational Poetry. Nilton suggested La Piedra Angular as our heading because it's a phrase that appears in a few of Julia's poems, including the poem El Chifa Nación or Chifa Nation from her 2021 collection, 18 Poemas de Fake Love para Keanu Reeves, or 18 Fake Love Poems for Keanu Reeves. La Piedra Angular means keystone or cornerstone and is made up of the words piedra or stone and angular angled, or angular. As Fabiana pointed out in one of our conversations leading up to this event, La Piedra Angular also carries associations with Inca architecture. Think of the buildings in Cusco that have been standing for over 600 years, thanks to precisely cut and closely fitted stones that were joined dry without mortar. Julia was a Piedra Angular in all of her communities. For me personally, she's a cornerstone of my work as a translator. The translational in our event title is not just for me, however. It's a gesture at one of Julia's core concerns over her 3-decade career. As I mentioned, Julia led a deeply plurilingual life, and her life in languages other than Spanish makes its mark on her poetry. She's written and self-translated poetry in not just Spanish, but English, Portuguese, and German. Spanish was her birthright, but she's also shared in an interview conducted by Nilton and the writer and cronista Julia Wong Kcomt that there was, quote, a time in my life when I thought I couldn't even write good Spanish. It felt like an effort. My father didn't speak the language well, though it's also true my mother was a grammar fanatic. Like Julia, her mother was tusán and her father had migrated from China. In her childhood, Julia was translated between Japan and Macau, where her father lived. I use translated here in the sense suggested by its Latin etymon translatus, meaning carried over. The first time I read Julia, I delighted in the warm recognition of these pinging questions that rise out of the body of her work. What if all of these languages are mine to play and to poem with, to wrench and weave and warp? And what if none of them are mine? To quote her poem, ¿Por qué tus diferencias? Or why do your differences? No sé cómo me metí en este enredo de lenguajes, una trenza de sílabas, un laberinto de M's, de P's, de dioses intrusos. No, I don't know how I got caught in this tangle of language, braided syllables, labyrinth of M's, P's, intrusive gods. One of my goals as a translator is to help open up more multidirectional continental conversations in Asian American literature. Julia read and was in conversation with Asian American writers based in the US. We once had an email exchange I now cherish about E.J. Ko's memoir, The Magical Language of Others, a book we were both dazzled by. But the same has not been true of the conversation in the other direction. Those of us sitting up here in the US have not historically read or had access to other Asian American literatures. I hope to help make the American and Asian American take on a more continental, transnational sense than it typically has in this country, a sense that is inclusive of the entire landmass of the Americas, which is made up of what we're taught in schools here as North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean, while also working to avoid flattening distinct identities and forms of meaning-making into US frameworks. Ultimately, the same migratory forces that brought Asian immigrants to the US also brought them to Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, Guyana, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Suriname, Trinidad, Venezuela. But in a way, Julia's work defies this impulse of mine because her work is so deeply transnational. This is not to say Asian American poetry can only be set in America or America, but it does maybe prod at what exactly defines the borders of Asian American poetry, or whether borders are relevant at all. Julia wrote where she was, and for long stretches she was in Argentina, Germany, Hong Kong, Mexico, Macau, Portugal. Those places are elements in her work and also become elemental, shaping her words and sentences. I'm reminded of the stanza from her poem Elefantes Chinos, or Chinese Elephants. En qué poro de tu omóplato voy a dejar que mi mejilla asiática gane el partido entre poniente y occidente y permita al guardián de las medias verdades morder la aridez de mis lecturas iracundas y revientes con pisadas suaves el dolor absurdo de la diferencia. And I translate, in which pore of your shoulder blade will I let my Asian cheek win the match between setting West and Occident, and allow the guardian of half-truths to bite the aridity of my irascible readings as your soft steps burst the absurd ache of difference. Today, we're talking about Asian American poetry and Asian diasporas, but of course, we can't talk about diaspora without talking about forced displacement, war, and genocide. It's now been a year since Israel began using US-funded bombs to commit genocide in Palestine. As we speak, people in Gaza, the West Bank, Beirut, and cities across Yemen are living with death hanging over their heads. I feel the narrative urge to try to fold this reality into what I've just been discussing, but I resist that urge because this reality cannot ultimately be neatly subsumed into narrative. It is unfathomable, even as we must continue working to fathom it, because our US tax dollars here have been used to murder now between 40,000 and over 100,000 people. With her characteristic moral clarity, Julia denounced the genocide in an Instagram post she made last year. In it, she wrote, quote, "Esta es la peor guerra que han perpetrado los estados, aún pudiendo evitarla. Esta es la peor guerra que atestigua la humanidad desde hace décadas. Es una guerra que debería cesar." In other words, this is the worst war the states has ever waged, even though they could have avoided it. This is the worst war humanity has witnessed for decades. It's a war that must end. In his Facebook post about this event, Nilton wrote that Julia, quote, "knew how to be a friend stripped of all futility, always fearing to cause harm, yet never refraining from saying or doing whatever her heart and mind demanded." As we remember her tonight, may we also honor the things that made Julia so uniquely Julia, including her willingness to stare down empire. And now we'll listen to Julia in her own words.
Hola, gracias a Jennifer por convocarme a leer poemas de mi libro El ladrón de codornices. Soy Julia Wong Kcomt. No me duele la muerte, me duele el brujo mirando el retablo. El fucsia de las mujeres me duelen en viento, claveles, me duelen, saben, a llanto de chicharro y aguacero de moja. 12 cruces, lunas muertas, y lamiendo las llagas vigilo encendida, casi como un cirio, duplicado, triplicado, casi como otros, redondando los cuernos, tantos, miles, uno por cada olvido. Cañón del Volga. El cóndor se esconde de ti, sagaz. No te mereces ni las piedras reventando al final del precipicio. Palabras de lodo y plumas viejas transgreden como acorde destemplado. Paraje lleno de muerte y de miseria, vehemente, un corazón europeo está cerrado. Lince la luz cuando babean de amor los cráneos extranjeros. Por supuesto que todos hemos perdido algo. Por supuesto que ahí es el lugar donde yo me paro y donde me siento más humana y es el lugar común más terrible de todos cuando se nos van las personas, sobre todo si son personas que pasan por nuestra vida y nosotros solamente observamos, ¿no? su impermanencia.
And next up, we'll hear from each of our readers. First up, we have River. River, meaning Dandelion, walks with his ancestors. He is a practitioner of ancestral medicine through writing, teaching, energy healing, and creating ceremony. As a poet, he writes to connect with the unseen and unspoken so we can feel and heal. As a shamanic healing arts practitioner, he guides people through transformation. Winner of the 2024 Lambda Literary Award for Exceptional New LGBTQ Writers, River is the author of Remembering Your Light, a debut chapbook on honoring matriarchs and ancestors across generations. A Tin House resident, Lambda Literary Fellow, and Kundimon Fellow, Rivers facilitates creative writing workshops where participants connect with their own inner and collective power. He has taught at Rutgers University, Newark, Apollo Center for Yoga and Health, Restorative Justice Initiative, and the Literary Museum of the City of New York, and elsewhere. His work has been thrice nominated for Best of the Net and is published in award-winning journals and anthologies. River loves to swim and does this work for queer and trans ancestors and descendants to come. Welcome, River.
Hey everyone. Hi, are we awake? Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction and for opening this, and also to Mohammed and Faliha for holding us down with the logistics to make this event possible. I am honored to be here today, and I'm going to start with a poem by a Palestinian poet, Rafat al-Rayyid. And then I'm going to move into sharing work by Julia, and then I'm going to close with one of my own poems that I find in conversation with Julia's work. I might take off my mask, is that okay? So I share this first poem also in honor of Julia's belief in a free Palestine. If I Must Die by Rifat al-Rayyir. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. So that poem, Rafat actually wrote in 2011, and it was widely circulated after he was killed by an Israeli airstrike on December 6, 2023, when his entire family's house was targeted and bombed. And so today, I think, as we gather to hold this event in honor of Julia Wong Kcomt, I also think about the thousands of martyrs in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And I think about how every single life lost should and must have moments like we are all having now, like gathering to honor Julia's life. And may we continue to each take our own individual actions until there is a free Palestine in our lifetime. So I'm gonna start by sharing some poems from Vice Royalties, which came out in 2021. I'm going to be sharing in English because my Spanish isn't quite there yet. But thank you to Jennifer. We have these translations. One, the eyes of Salambo have fallen. Amid all the absurdity, the conquistador kisses my hand. E of empire leaves open my heart. Shrieks of war, 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 war. Is two poems over from that collection, and just content warning, some mention of touch potentially without consent. Three, seeding drum, flower, saber, your angle to wound with light, bathing the limp from the side. Where should I touch you, Lima, to make you scream? What ecstasy do you keep in that thorn of old neighborhoods? Who fondled you there? Who made that sweetness spring forth? Perfume me with death, spray me with cramps. I want to shriek, I want to, and let a bull plow through me. This next piece is called The Red Rooster, and it's written by Julia in memoriam to Jose Watanabe, who's a Peruvian poet. The Red Rooster. Peru dies like garlic bulbs, this whim of blouses cut so masterfully. The iron windows, baroque, relentless, paint staining my ovaries. Sushi is now the language of the people, and my mighty noodles wait in a forgotten pot. Papa told me to detest the Japanese, like everyone says to hate Chileans. But with so much love, I find no difference between the cherry tree, the sakura, the lotus flower, and the olive bush. In the Atacama, Christ sifts through red grape seeds. Peru dies, Waka, and all I remember is what you said about my aunt. She was hot, your Aunt Carmen. She didn't look Chinese. I smiled, unoffended, because in Peru, nobody looks like anything. There was a chifa restaurant. You ate wonton soup with your Chinese friends. And as we searched for an emblem to overcome the centimeter and a half of difference in our eyelids, a red rooster loosed a sound louder than nothingness. Our Peru is dying. The rooster's crow will return when the stone flies. Yeah, it invites royalties if you keep turning the pages. You'll happen upon the second part of the book, which is titled 7 Hopeless Poems. And the one I'll be reading is called Reincarnation. Reincarnation. The tree on its feet ejects ghosts. The tree corpse. I have arrived once again in salt form, chewed up fossils, weights of dead loves. God looks askew at me through the blinds. God would live again if he felt my faith. And I have 2 more poems with you. Everyone still with me? So this last poem that I'll share from Julia is from A Blind Salmon. It just came out in July 2024 with Deep Vellum. There's copies in the back. It's her first full-length poetry collection of her many, many volumes that's translated into English. And so thanks to Jennifer, we have this available. Manners. She's teaching. Look at her. Look at her red, varnished mouth. This is how, she says. I obey. 1 serving of rice with bean curd. I have no idea how to eat this rice. So different from home, the smell of these mandarins, so different. These open heart nuts. The ones mama peels are splotched, crinkled, and black. A happy man comes up to greet Mama. Let's talk about China, he says. He sings and makes a proper face. These little ones, tomorrow's men, skin of porcelain. A couple times I see people who appear without heads, spirits running loose, angry people, bearing jade, made of plastic, eating, moving. I want to be with Mama when that sadness overtakes me. It's a big sadness, a heart loaded with who knows what. I'd like Mama to tell me why there are children saying things I don't understand, why I have to say things I don't understand. You look at the streets, they've transformed with red doors and strange buildings. Before, these were all regular houses. Now, the people who live here come from so far, from the Middle Kingdom fire of the world's superstition. The air trembles. 2 Peking ducks predict much prosperity. I miss Mama, and Papa is making something sweet. Miss Chinese teacher, I want to cry, my cheeks stifled. When I decide to leave this place, what will you do to keep my pencil drawing a grieving mountain? And I'll close my reading with one of my poems. Unreported. I'm beginning to think the news doesn't matter. Blank book, burned book, singed scar ignited. History knows what it did. Empire knows where it's going. The same stories rerun to cause fear and terror. Human minds malleable, paid warfare controls. I'm beginning to think the news doesn't matter. What's committed gets erased. What's erased called forgotten. Historical amnesia, a people blame themselves. Growing bushfire leaves evidence only in ashes. History knows where empire is going. I scavenged the records to scour, bleached pages, bitter stares, blank conquerors bathed in vanished histories. I'm beginning to think the news doesn't. What I deem breaking. I'm finally dancing. I rescued myself from the flames. My scars, new spines of books igniting, evidence in risen ashes. History knows empire is going. News anchors call me stoic, my face a solitary mask, sanctuary not for taking. Citrus flowers bloom, bouquets of lemons at my doorstep right now. The news doesn't matter. I soak their rhymes in honey, till history is empire, evidenced only in ashes. Thank you.
Jennifer for sharing those poems. Next up, we have Nilton. Nilton Maa is a poet whose voice captures the emotional and cultural complexities of identity, queerness, and heritage. As a Chinese Peruvian, his work reflects his tusán experience, exploring themes of belonging and the intersections of personal and collective history. Nilton has published 4 books, including the novel Cuando muere la niebla and the poetry collection Que deseos escoges hoy para morir. His poetry collections, rich in imagery and depth, have been featured in international literary magazines and anthologies. His work has garnered recognition, winning awards in contests such as Concurso de Microrelatos La Cruda Brevedad, and receiving an honored verbal mention in El Mar. Nilton is also an editor at New York Poetry Review and previously organized the queer poetry event at Fuerza Fest, advocating for marginalized voices in literature. Though primarily a poet, Nilton's passion extends to dance, singing, and acting, infusing his creative pursuits with energy and authenticity. Welcome, Nilton.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
All right, I'm gonna try to change the tone a little bit, okay? It feels a little bit slow for me, and I am a hyper person. So I'm very happy to be here and to be sharing all of these amazing poems from our great friend. And also, well, for me, it was someone very important, more than a friend, more than a master, more than a guide. She was someone really remarkable. And I am completely sure that people who got the chance to share the path with Julia can say the same thing that I am sharing at this moment. It is very important, and I am very grateful with Jennifer because she made something that I've been thinking for quite long and I didn't have the chance to. Julia passed on the previous March, and it was really a strong situation for me. And I remember this, and I was with my friend over here. I was I was in my way to going to the Bowery Poetry Club and jump into the stage to read a couple of poems that I've been working on at that period. And while in the train, I got the new. I remember the sensation. First, I was walking to the train. I didn't want to see my phone, but it just stopped to start to vibrate, unstoppable. And I knew because of the intention, because of the situation, that something was happening. Julia and I, during the time we were talking and chatting all the time about different things by phone and by messages, and she was all the time supportive in any of the questions or doubts that I had. So I had a great memory of someone who was very generous in many ways, but also she built something important on myself, which is my voice. She was a great, great artist, but overall she was a great human. And I remember this, and I'm gonna use this 10 minutes to speak a little bit of my experience with her. The first time that I did at her house, it was to do this video that Jennifer present. It was the presentation of her book, her novel, Aquello que perdimos en la arena. And I was just came back from Canada to Lima to live again in Peru, and I just started my channel. And I had like 20 followers. Nobody were there to see what I was doing, but Julia reached to me and said, Nilton, I wanted to present my book through your channel. And I said, like, is this serious? Like, this person really wants to present something so amazing on a channel of only 20 people watching, which basically was like 5 of my friends, 5 of my family, and the rest, I don't know who else. It was like, okay, so in the beginning, I felt a little bit overwhelming because I didn't believe on myself. I didn't believe that I could do things. And she put it over there for me. And I was in company of another amazing writer from Peru, who is also tusán, Julio Villanueva Chang. It was my first time I knew about him, a lot about him. He was like someone very remarkable in our community and also for the Peruvian community. And I just couldn't believe that I was in the presence of someone so big people over there. They were very kind. And at the end of the program, she gave me this beautiful piece that I am having right now with me. And she told me that she brought this from the Tibet and she used it in a moment of desperation, and it helped her to heal. And then she gave it to her daughter, and now she felt that she needed to give it to me. So this is a treasure. So after that night, I really get in touch with her, And since that moment on, we never stopped to do things together. Every time that I was having something, every word, every little poem, she was always keen to read it. She was always keen to correct it, to give some words to advise, always from kindness, always from love. And that's something that I really admire from her. I was so lucky to collaborate with her, and she also was open to collaborate with me in many craziness that I started, like working in forehands for short stories, or to organize reading for the Chinese Peruvian community in Lima. And we were all the time very active during the pandemic through Zoom, doing a lot of activities, thinking all the time about people. But in the same way that she was so intense with work, she was also so intense with many things in everything in her life. And that's something that I also admire from her, which was the authenticity of how she ran her life, her work, her friendship, her motherhood, everything. Again, I start reading a poem that I were thinking about her, and it's a project that I don't know if it's going to finalize or not, but this is a collection that I am working right now, thinking on her, and it's going to be dedicated to her as well. It is in Spanish, and before of that, I want to say something to the people who is watching us right now in Peru. Queridos amigos, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y acompañarnos. Esto es para Julia. Sé que todas las personas que nos están mirando también están pensando en ella como nosotros en este momento. ¿Recuerdas la calle vacía? Rodando en el asfalto subsistimos sobre la roca. Sol, nube, opacidad, garúa. Un año sin estaciones cayendo de los jacarandá, siguiendo la curva donde decantan los malecones, respirando el sudor aceitoso, salivando en la mascarilla, felices de encontrar un vestigio, la espuma blanca salina brotando de nuestras pupilas. Ahora me siento a esperar la primavera, en este mundo nuevo gobernado por la corriente, en este mar que solo guarda el imaginario de tu voz y un grupo ambiguo de recuerdos que lanzo a la entraña acuosa, intentando alcanzar los versos que quedaron flotando, que se mezclan con el sonido de las olas, que performan el adiós de un tiempo fugado contigo, al igual de mudo e igual de ausente que la historia de nuestros padres, ajena a tu palabra y tan cercana a tu corazón. During the first meeting, and actually the only meeting that we had with Jennifer to speak about this event, it comes to my mind right away when she asked us which would be a great title for this event. And for me, it was no doubt about talking about La Piedra Angular. And it's not only because I read that in one of my favorite poems from her, which is Chief Nation, which I remember the first time that I listened the poem from her, I couldn't stop crying because it was very strong. And I was walking here near to 42nd Street and the 8th and just feeling stupid for all the the crime that I was doing on the street and with the whole street full of people from all over the world. It was very intense, but also because in the same way that Jennifer, for me and for my job, Julia Wong was the keystone. She was La Piedra Angular. And I am saying this not in vain because I have 4 books published and all of those has a touch from Julia. The first one, which is a crazy story out of the world in an imaginary world. She was so kind to write the back part of the book, and it was very exciting when I got the chance to get that words for such a huge artist. And for my second book, she was the one who helped me to find the press in Mexico to do it, who was the first press that published also 18 poemas de Fake Love para Keanu Reeves. So we worked together with the same press, and she told me all the things that I should do with them. She checked the poems one by one, and she told me which one were the mistakes, which one the places to adjust, change verses and everything. So basically, it has her hands all over the pages. For my third book, I was doubting what I should speak about. Like, I felt that something was missing for me, and she was kind to tell me like I was leaving one part of myself behind, and that part was my Peruanity, my experience of being Peruvian in a society that is not really fair and is all the time rude and violent with the poor people. And I am coming from Coyique, which is a neighborhood, is one of the most poorest neighborhood of Lima. And she told me, if you can intertwine your experience as the son of a Chinese and also your experience as the son of Coyique, you will present something powerful. So thinking about that, I developed my second novel, which is Cuando muere la niebla. And I tried to explain my experience being a Chinese Peruvian living in a community where the violence was the primary character. And it was a success for me. And for the last one, which I developed living already here in New York City, she helped me with one of the poems, and she also helped me with the title of the book, which in the beginning was very photo and it didn't work. So my editor told me this title is not going to work. So every time that I had a doubt regarding poetry or regarding anything or when I felt lost, she always had an answer for me. And that's the reason. And I remember she said like, this last verse of the first poem would work perfectly, which is "Qué bestia escoge soy para morir," which in English would be "Pick the beast that you want to die with tonight." And I didn't have any doubt that that was my answer. So she always had something to give it to me. So right now I really feel the lost. But my biggest approximation to her and her poetry was thinking about our root and the place that we came from, which is China. So based on that, I wanna share with you a second poem in English titled Diaspora. In the world, cities hold a touch of homeland. A faint and a small piece under construction, part of an eye, skin, eyelash, dissection of a common face that complements the weirdness of our existence, of the land where we create an extension that always ends up being foreign. No one told me I would have a place there. Only insult ignite my desire. The hope that flies in the sky, that peers through the night. Darker and more little than those eyes, those hands, those gestures that turn me into the voice that isn't heard. So I cross the world to find understanding in the eyes of my race. But the world sees me as a stranger. A face or word is not enough to be. What pieces complements my hybrid parts? There, in the center, they have looked at me in the avenues and laughed as I pass by. Human chimneys stop their consumptions. They observe me with their certainties, with their blackened teeth, and their faces of Chinese porcelain, knowing that there's something different in me, like in my land, where people smile calling me Chino, without knowing I'm from that kingdom, just as I always was to my own land. That's why I construct a face with every piece I find, every art installed in foreign cities, every pagoda, every temple, every lion worldly called dragon, every fish consumed by ginger, with the same taste of lost homeland that found in every soup that fed our souls, every confused look fixed on my lips, announcing my ambiguity in perfect Spanish. And finally, months before Julia passed away, she was looking for spaces for where to present this group of poems, and it was the time that I was starting very actively to edit for Nueva York Poetry Review. So I asked her if she would be so kind to send me some poems, and so I could publish and spread the word of her poetry, because I believe that she really deserved the notice. She really deserved the space to be read all over the world. So right now, to finish my participation, I want to share this poem called La Sábana y la Almeja Rota that she sent it to me. El olor a peces muertos en mis manos. La impotencia exhibida al exprimir mis jugos nocturnos en soledad. Húmeda la boca de niños sin leche. La caza inoportuna de mariposas ha tejido un enjambre de zoofilias incoherentes. Te he nombrado con apodos y llanto. Había olvidado que una madre moderna no debe usar el lenguaje enjaulado o las jaulas. Pero fíjate otra vez en las sábanas. Cuelgan como el alma de una nación en los cordeles eternos. Y yo no sé de qué material era nuestra historia, este binomio de hija y lechuza que aúlla por un cordón umbilical, tan grande como su sed. Así nos construimos como un gigante mamario, pero reniega y se niega a sacar líquidos pusilánimes de sus hélices enredadas en la eternidad. Muchas gracias.
And about your experiences with Julia. For our last reader, before we head into the conversation, we have Fabiana. Born into a family of professional photographers, Fabiana Chiu is an educator, visual artist, photographer, writer, and arts administrator of indigenous Spanish and Chinese ancestry. Raised and educated in Lima, Peru, she's a first-generation college graduate, a first-generation immigrant to the US, and a fourth-generation Peruvian Chinese. Fabiana studied communications and journalism at Universidad de Lima, Eastern Kentucky University, and the Ohio State University. She has held key positions at museums in Massachusetts, New York, and Connecticut, and has spoken nationally and internationally on the topic of museums and communities. While serving as the Museum of Chinese in America's first deputy director, she co-curated the core exhibition, Where is Home? Chinese in America, in the Americas. With support from a Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship, she wrote China Latina for recollecting early Asian America, essays and cultural history. Fabiana's visual arts work is in private collections and has been featured in museum exhibitions. Her projects include the Natural History Wearable Art Project, the Remote Portrait Project, and the Broken Camera Project. She is a member of the cultural collective Tusán, which aims to make visible the cultural and artistic output of people of Chinese descent in the Spanish-speaking diaspora. Fabiana lives north of Manhattan in a 900-acre nature preserve. Welcome, Fabiana.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm usually behind the camera. This is very unusual for me. So anyway, here we go. So Julia, Julia, this is for you. And there's a bunch of people here who are interested in knowing more about you. So we're proud to share her with you as well. And for those of you who met her, what a special thing to have Jennifer have organized this memorial for her, and for us to share some of the poems that she wrote. I'm going to be sharing with you 3 poems that she wrote. I will read them first in Spanish and then in English. I believe this one is from The Blind Salmon. Is it Debería irme a vivir a Colombia? Yes. Okay. So this one's available in the book right behind all of you. So this is from The Blind Salmon, un salmón ciego. Debería irme a vivir a Colombia. Anybody here been to Colombia? Right. I think there's somebody on the Zoom in Colombia. Debería irme a vivir a Colombia. He leído un poema escrito con colorete en una calle de Medellín. He visto un ocaso fresco y encendido al mismo tiempo. Un hombre negro mirando las manos blancas de alguien. Un carro de agua, una loción que huele a flores calientes. Y digo, Colombia, porque pienso en la palabra y se me ocurren cosas en la boca. Vidrio molido le llaman algunos. Otra intención de silencio anaranjado. Colibrí, plátano tierno, dientes de niña otra vez. Arepas, un compás de cumbia, gorgojos en pasto. El recuerdo de la barba de un amigo que era profesor. Una letra escrita con gomina. Una frase que en otro país hubiera estado mal dicha. Un cuadro amarillo que parece hecho de besos y caléndulas. Una bala en la hoja del cuaderno. Mi profesora de religión era de Colombia. Se llamaba Julia Alba. Alba y Julia. Alba, su rezo. Y mi profesora de geografía era de Medellín. Se llamaba Magdalena. El mundo, me decía, es un río, una ciudad pequeña, un chico bueno riéndose en la misa, un pan fresco en el momento exacto. Y esas monjas se murieron mientras subían un cerro cubierto de hojas de limón. Y esas monjas aparecen a veces en la noche. Debería irme a Colombia. Now in English. I ought to go live in Colombia. I once read a poem written in lipstick on a Medellin street. I once saw a sunset that was both chilly and lit up. A black man looking at someone's white hands. A water car. Lotion in a hot floral scent. I say Colombia because when I think the word, things happen in my mouth. Brown glass, some call it. Another motive for orange silence. Hummingbird, green banana, baby teeth once more. Arepas, cumbia beat, weevils in grass. The memory of the beard on a friend who was a teacher. A single letter written on hair gel. A sentence that would have been incorrect in another country. A yellow painting that looks like it's made of marigolds and kisses. A bullet atop a loose leaf sheet. My religion teacher was from Colombia. Her name was Julia Alba. Daybreak and Julia. Daybreak, her prayer. And my geography teacher was from Medellin. Her name was Magdalena. The world, she told me, is a river, a little city, a good boy laughing at mass, fresh bread at exactly the right time. And those nuns died as they climbed a mountain covered in lime leaves. And those nuns appear sometimes at night. I ought to go to Colombia. The next one was published in her poetry book, Tequila Prayers. It has here, has illustrations by a good friend of the Tusán community, Ignacio Lopez Calvo. I hope he's listening. So the name of this poem is Letanía del Odio. Jennifer has translated as Litany of Hatred. And thank you to Julia's family for allowing us to read the yet unpublished translation. I'll start in Spanish. And this is just an excerpt. A veces miro mi odio como a mi madre, que nunca puso a otro hombre antes que a mi viejo. Mi padre, en cambio, aunque no puso ninguna mujer delante de mi madre, no sabía qué hacer con ella. A veces la admiraba, a veces la quería y mayormente la olvidaba. Sus pensamientos no estaban en otra mujer, sino en el aire, más allá de una escalera transparente, en alguna nube que se quiebra. Mi madre compraba escapularios del Señor de los Milagros. Rezaba. Escribía cartas en chepenano antiguo, algo así como, estimado esposo, aún le espero. He aprendido a cocinar el arroz como usted me enseñó. En la olla de fierro negra, cuando hierve, le pongo un latón entre el poto y la hornilla para que se seque. Mientras aún está húmedo, el arroz tiene un aroma que me hace recordarlo. Usted me enseñaba los nombres de los ríos de la China. Me hubiera gustado que a usted le guste el Perú. So, one of the reasons why Julia is so important is because she also writes about her experience, her ancestry, her family, being a mother. She was everything. She did everything. Definitely a force to be reckoned with. So much so, she's probably still with us. So anyway, this is the English version or the English translation. Sometimes I look at my hatred like I look at my mother, who never put another man before my old man. My father, however, though he never put another woman before my mother, didn't know what to do with her. Sometimes he admired her. Sometimes he loved her. Mostly, he forgot her. His mind wasn't on another woman. It was in the air, past the transparent staircase, in a cloud that shatters. My mother bought scapulars of the Lord of Miracles and prayed. Wrote letters in old Chapin Spanish along the lines of, esteemed husband, I wait for you still. I have learned to make rice like you taught me. In the black pot, iron pot, as soon as it boils, I place a can between the bottom of the pot and the stove so it'll dry. When it's damp, the rice has a smell that makes me think of you. You taught me the names of the rivers in China. I would have liked for you to have liked Peru. And the last one, poets often are inspired by other art forms, especially the visual arts, music as well. So we know this. And she wrote about photography. And that's how we actually met. She was working on a couple of exhibits, I think in Asia. And we connected over the phone, over Zoom, somehow over the internet. And we talked about photography. And it's interesting because those of us involved in the arts, sometimes we don't know really how to explain our own work. And you have to, it's almost like it's helpful to have somebody else tell you what it is that you're doing. It's like looking at a mirror, right? So she did that for photography. And so she had a close relationship with it, obviously. And on social media, she credits two photographers as being her support system, Antonio Hit and Carlos Chong. So, so I'll read this excerpt that she wrote about photography. Me fascina la fotografía. Eso me pone en desventaja frente a un ojo perturbado. Me hace débil. Inigualable lo que el vientre ve. La lejana oscuridad. Un fotógrafo tiene una inspiración en la hipófisis que va más allá de la sabiduría normal sobre las cosas. Un fotógrafo puede condenarte por no saber mirar como él. Encierra mucha muerte el ojo de un fotógrafo. Quiere congelar el instante en que volteas el dedo, miras la calle, la luna se encarama, el suelo se moja, los amantes se dispersan, los bebés maman y las auroras boreales quedan pintadas en el firmamento. El ojo, como una hormiga, captará lo necesario. Un fotógrafo es un ser raro, hormiga y ángel al mismo tiempo. No mira las cosas como son, sino que hace las cosas casi como él quisiera que fueran. Y es tan importante el retrato, la imagen y el lenguaje del color, la distancia y el tamaño, que se pueden descubrir todas las mentiras del universo con un solo enfoque. La voz de la noche se impregna en el papel. Las despedidas, la frustración, las emociones, la vergüenza, sobre todo la vergüenza, y el orgullo, sobre todo el orgullo. Now in English. This was also in the Blind Salmon. Available in the back. The title is My Guardian Angel. I find photography fascinating, which puts me at a disadvantage when it comes to a disturbed eye. It makes me weak, unmatched. What the belly can see, the faraway dark. Photographers possess pituitary inspiration that goes beyond the normal wisdom of things. A photographer can condemn you for not knowing how to see the way they do. The eye of a photographer encloses a good deal of depth. It wants to freeze the moment when you turn your finger, look at the street, the moon climbs up, the floor gets soaked, lovers disperse, babies nurse, and the aurora borealis is painted on the firmament. The eye, like an ant, snatches what's necessary. A photographer is a strange being, ant and angel all at once. They don't see things as they are. Instead, it's as if they make things into what they want. The image of language of color, distance, and size that can uncover the universe's every lie with a single shift of focus. Night's voice permeates the paper. Farewells, frustration, emotions, shame, above all, shame. and pride, above all, pride.
I'd like to invite all three of our participants up for about 30 minutes of conversation, 25 minutes, 20 minutes. Where are we in the? Yeah, 20 to 30 minutes of conversation, and then we'll open up for questions from you guys. Thank you all for sharing your work, Julia's work, and for sharing, yeah, a little bit about your relationship with Julia. It's so wonderful to be in a space with people who knew Julia and loved her. Some of you have already talked about this, but to start, I'd love to ask you all how Julia was a piedra angular for you. And yeah, anyone can go. We don't have to go in any particular order.
Okay, so I'll say that actually the way that I know Julia is primarily through her work. We didn't have the chance to like formally spend time together in person, but I find myself connecting to her work the same way that I connect to the greatest writers of our time, like in this country, like James Baldwin or Audre Lorde or Florian Saldua. And it's through the work that they leave behind. I think that when I see the videos of Julia sharing, I see like an aunt and someone who would have probably like been thrilled with like me and my career pursuits in poetry, and like encouraging me forth. I think what I really love about the legacy she leaves behind is the commitment to truth telling. In her work, there is a boldness, a tenacity, and there's a lot of unapologetic, this is who I am, this is what I see in the world, and these are the truths that I'm going to share with you all. Even though not all of her poems are autobiographical, she's like someone to me who's not afraid to air out the dirty laundry. And that takes a lot of courage in terms of art making, as I think folks here could agree with. That is what makes the work relatable when you are so hyper specific to your own experiences and unafraid to name them, that other people can relate them. One of the reasons I shared the Red Rooster is because even though I'm not Tucson Chinese Peruvian, I very much grew up here, is because I could relate so much to how she speaks about place and how she speaks about community, and also her racialized experience growing up in Peru. And so I think that commitment to truth telling is what I would say makes her a piedra angular for me.
So when I was in her presence, like I said earlier, she was a force to be reckoned with. I never really wanted to say anything in her presence because I just wanted to listen to her. You know how they say that the greatest art is transformational? Like you go into a room and then you come out a whole different person. You've seen something, you've learned something, you've grown. Well, that's what it was like to be in her presence, and to witness her work. She had strong ideas. You didn't always agree with them, but respect, man. You know, it's like she had that conviction that you were like, okay, yes, I consider that, and good for you. But certainly whenever I was in her presence, I just wanted to listen and learn. Maybe someday, you know.
Well, yes, For the people who is watching us in Peru, I just wanna explain what is piedra angular for me in Spanish. Sorry, I'm going to be short for people who doesn't speak Spanish. Sorry. Para las personas que nos están mirando en Perú, quiero explicar por qué Piedra Angular fue el título que escogimos para este evento. Y es que creo que todos coincidimos en que Julia sigue siendo la piedra angular de la literatura tusán en el Perú, hablando de manera general, pero también de manera personal puedo decir que Julia ha sido la piedra angular en mi trabajo literario y también en mi vida personal como tusán y en mi construcción como tusán, tanto en el Perú como en el mundo, porque ella siempre fue la misma persona sin importar el lugar en el que se encontrara y es la enseñanza más grande que llevo conmigo a cualquier lugar al que voy. Eso es todo.
Thank you. Yeah, totally same, yeah, experiences with Julia. The feeling of wanting to listen and soak everything when you were with her. I think she must have had that effect on a lot of people. We've talked a little bit about cultural inheritances and roots, which is a theme that Julia returns to again and again in her body of work that spans 30 years. Her Chinese or Sino roots and how they appear in her life. Could you all talk a little bit about how you think about or engage with cultural inheritances in her work and also your own?
I have a microphone, so I guess I can start. Well, once I remember, not once, actually, a couple of times, I remember Julia telling me that she wanted so bad to get a little bit away from her Chinese or from her inheritation, start to write and work on something more universal. Even though she never could stop expressing her tusanity in every work that she did until the end. And in the same way, that's something that I think a lot of on it after she told me that, and obviously living in New York City, I try also to get to change my voice and just try to work in something more universal and something that everybody can feel related to. But in the same way that Julia, I couldn't get away from it. It's something that is part of me. And I know that also for her, it was something that get her close, not only to the community or her feelings for being Chinese Peruvian, but also to her family, to her dad, her mom, that she loved deeply, and she expressed it so clearly and frankly honest in every poem that she wrote, thinking on them. So now I'm not fighting anymore with my Christianity. I think that I cannot be Peruvian without being Chinese as well. And in the same way, I can forget a big part of me is also coming from China. And I really want to honor it with everything that I do. Like we are honoring her right now.
So, writing about one's own ethnic background is difficult. And especially coming from Latin America, where there are not very many examples. So for those of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s, you're grasping for anything that speaks to you, and you're reading all the writers that are not Chinese Peruvian, because there wasn't much for us we didn't see ourselves in literature. And if we saw ourselves in literature, in award-winning Latin American literature, the way those of Asian descent are depicted is not necessarily the way in which you and your families see themselves. So anyway, having Julia as our contemporary, my contemporary, is just a breath of fresh air. You have to have a lot of courage to engage with this background, because everything else around you tells you, no, this is not Peruvian, this is not Latin American, this is not sufficiently Asian, whatever that may be. And yet we are, and we have experiences to share. And it's now having 175 years since the first Chinese arrived in Peru. And some may say even longer. And we're just coming to the place where we feel that it's okay to come out and talk about it. Right, Nilton? Yes, yes. The first time that I saw us talked about in a positive way was in an article written by Chinese American historian Him Mark Lai, who was a pioneer historian out of San Francisco. And my jaw dropped. He was talking about the Chinese in the Americas, throughout the Americas. And I was like, wait, we're not being stereotyped here. You know, we're not caricatures. We're real people, and there are other people like us in Colombia, in Brazil, in Panama, in Chile, in Argentina. We're not alone. And he put that in the article, and that was the first time I just felt like, okay, I'm somebody. Before that, pretty invisible.
Yeah, so to both of yours too, I'll add that across Julia's body of work, what I really admire is the way that she writes about grief. In terms of cultural inheritances, I think across like Asian diasporic culture, like grief just isn't an emotion that is given room to breathe and to be named, especially not from people who are gendered as like girls and women. And so for me, like in her work, she's just really unapologetic about that. She's like, I'm crying. It feels like my city is crying, my country is crying. And it's because these are the things that have happened to the women in my family or to the people in these communities. Her work is really unafraid to witness and to write down what is being witnessed. And I'll also say that in terms of what I see her doing is she writes about everyday stories in a way that makes them history. So for someone like her writing Tusán, Chinese Peruvian woman, those are not the stories that are reflected in textbooks. And so for her, her commitment to telling those stories, whether it's her own lived experiences or the people in her lives, like her aunt or her mother, that is also writing into literature and into the canon, what is not formally documented in history. And that's something that I can really relate to in her work and also in my own.
Thank you guys. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear some of these themes that I feel like are also things we like circle when we talk about Asian US American literature, right? Like this, like not feeling depicted, not feeling reflected in what you're consuming, and then the shock of recognition the first time it happens, right? And then this feeling of, like you were saying, Fabiana, like being depicted the way you see yourself as opposed to how other people have seen you or stereotyped you. And this transformation of everyday stories into history. But also, you know, as the years go on, this feeling of like, maybe this is also a trap, right? Like this trap, this representational trap of always writing about like the themes that, you know, are important, but also become in a way like well-trod paths, right? That can also feel stifling in their way, as you were saying, you were discussing with Julia about her desire to be more universal, right? Although what that means too, right? Like universal is a sticky word, a sticky concept.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess, you know, we're at the Asian American Writers Workshop. And I feel like we started talking about it, but like, what can you talk about this term Asian American, what it means to you, what its limits are, what its potential is, and how you see Julia's work, how you see your own work, fitting into that label or not fitting in.
All right, since I have one. So for me, to this question, I kind of look at how the term Asian American came to be. And the term Asian American came to be in the 1960s as a political identity. It came directly from cross-racial solidarity organizing. And before that, the word used was Oriental. And so with that in mind, obviously with the term Asian American, even across decades, when people think about it, it's often associated with East Asian people, which like obscures all of the vast differences across the ethnicities of Asian America, and also doesn't achieve that political unity that it was conceived for. And so I both like move with that term as someone who is born and raised here, and like especially during these times, like looks to the Asian American community to build with. And at the same time, I think about how these racial identities, like even Asian America, is often falling within the man-made borders of the United States as a country and also as an empire. And so I feel like part of why the English translations of Julia Wong Kcomt's work is coming so late is because she's not officially seen inside of this canon, even of Asian American poetry. And yet, like she is like clearly a part of it. If we were to and are to expand our understanding of race, like beyond the borders that are artificially drawn. And so hopefully like with more translations of her work, it also gets them.
So, so much to talk about this. If I am correct, in Latin America, we have not had an Asian American movement. So when our colleagues in Peru look north, they see all of what the Asian American movement has done for here and wishes we had the same. So it's looked up in admiration for the student movements of the 60s and 70s, and is looked at as a model. Okay. The other thing is that America is not the sole propriety of the US. Those of us who've grown up in Latin America were Americans. We may not be American for the purpose of the INS, but we're all American. North, Central, South America, it's all one America. So Asian America, Latin America, it's all hemispheric. And actually, if you look at the writings of Julia, you know, she could have been here all along writing about all these things. So she should definitely be seen as an American writer, and within it, as an Asian American writer as well, and a Latin American writer, and not one thing or another. I mean, we're talking about also overlapping concepts here. But yeah, I mean, so there's the Asian American part of it that in Peru, those of us of tusán background look in admiration of. And then there's the whole concept of what is America, and how, she's borderless actually in her writings. I mean, she's been so many places and spoken regardless of where she was geographically.
I do agree with Fabiana in this respect. So in Peru, we call us tusán literature when we are referred to our work in our poetry or narrative or whatever it is. So I listened about the term Asian American when I came here, and my understanding was to basically relate it to the United States. But we cannot forget, as you said, that America is a whole continent, and being someone who is actually developing a literature work in the United States and being Asian as anyone else living in the continent, I can say that it's very important to say that we are also Asian Americans because we are coming from the same continent. The work of Julia was borderless, as you said. It could be understood in any latitude, any usher of the language of the Spanish. And well, thanks to Jennifer, now we are reading in English, and I believe that's something very important right now, because I believe that the words and the poems of Julia, her verses, should be read by the world. And this approximation is vital for our community, the Asian community in general, because we experience the same sensation, the same situation. Even it doesn't matter which one is the country, we feel that we are outsiders anywhere we are. Or at least that was my feeling when I was living in Peru, and sometimes when I living in here as well. That's something that has to change, and the change starts from us. So I believe that if nobody was talking about this until now, we should start to speak about this. We are all Asian Americans who were born in our continent, and it shouldn't be borders that separate us. We should be constructing and building together, as Julia did.
It's interesting what you said, Fabiana, about there not having been an Asian American movement in Latin America. In many ways, I feel like that construction is happening right now through groups like Tusán, which the two of you are part of. Yeah, like I think, for example, that poem Elefantes Chinos that I read a little bit of earlier, I think it's very striking that Julia uses the word asiática, which has not historically been used in the same way that the word Asian has been used, at least since the 60s in the US, right? Like it's got a different valence in Spanish than Asian does in English. I did also want to, I guess, follow up on this conversation, because there is also a way that, like, looking to the US as a model, as you were saying, Fabiana, can also lead to flattening, right? Like to the bringing of frameworks that don't always 100% fit. And I think we edged around this a little bit in that call we had before this event. So I guess I'm curious your thoughts too on that. Like, what are the ways? What are the pitfalls too of sort of this joining together?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you. So you're absolutely right. We cannot apply the Asian American movement model 100% to south of the border. The experiences are somewhat different. The experiences are still mediated by a history of immigration, for sure. But The political realities are extremely different. There has been violence throughout North, Central, South America against people of Asian descent, no question about that. But the way all of this happens, the way 170 years of constant migration to Peru happens, very different. And we cannot use, you'll go crazy if you try to use the lens of the experience here in Peru. Certain things work and certain other things don't work. The coalition building works here. What happened here, and that's some of what we're trying to do in Peru as well with Tusanake, that coalition building, that networking, that, you know, the more the merrier. You have that talent, you have that talent, let's just all bring it together. That works. Our experience is mediated by also being part indigenous. Both Nilton and I have indigenous Peruvian blood. And many Asian Americans don't here. So it makes us feel even, we have a incredibly strong connection to the land of Latin America as indigenous peoples as well. That other people don't see it as such as a form of violence. That other people racialize us and may think of us as being eternal foreigners just because of the way we may look to them. That is something that is repeated. But anyway, our existence, you're right, there are models, and yet in practice, we have to come up with our own model. But there's still a great deal of admiration. Yes, like, I don't think we have songs of resistance yet. Let's come up with some.
It's very complex. It is very complex. But you pointed something very interesting, which is how connected we are to our roots. And it is extremely true. It is extremely true. And my experience as a Peruvian was in the beginning it was anger. You know, I remember this when I came back from Canada to live in Peru in 2018. I came back saying like, why we do not have an institution who represent us and a poet and an artist who can speak about truth. And I was so wrong. I said, maybe I'm gonna be the first one. I was so wrong. And then I got a chance to meet Julia and get to work with Tusanaje, which I say hello to all of you guys who are making a great job to offer us a voice of community, which is important because we have to build as a community. And yeah, Julia did it since the first moment. And when I met her, she already had more than 15 books, and I didn't know about her. It's incredible. Being a Chinese Peruvian who pretends to be a poet and who doesn't know the word Julia, what was going on? Something was going on for sure. And during the years that I started meeting her, I admired her from the first moment. Because I felt represented, finally. And I felt represented because she didn't only speak about the experience of being Tusán, she speak about the experience of being Peruvian, of being from different backgrounds, from different races, colors, and expressions. And that's the powerful thing about her work. I think that we can all recognize about that, right? So I don't know where I was going with this, but what I can say is that yeah, we should embrace our uniqueness for sure of being Chinese Peruvians, but also to open our arms for other Asians around America that want to share their truth and be together. We are not so different. Yeah.
Thank you both for that. I think I can add kind of, as someone who's Asian American who first traveled to Peru, to Lima specifically in 2016. It was on a trip where I was going to Chinatowns in different countries around the world to kind of document stories of migration, displacement, and resistance across the diaspora. And just adding to the conversation of how we can't flatten the movements or just apply one to the other. I think what Chinese Peruvian experience has that I don't see mirrored back here is the way that language of Chinese is so ingrained into different words in Spanish. So words like Ciao or Chifa that have like, or like tusán that like have those roots in Chinese words, like have made it their way into Spanish as a language in a way that I can't mirror back for how English has been created. And I think in terms of our country, there's just very different like racial segregation laws that have like prohibited intermingling like legally across racial groups that I think to this day still adds to the divide across groups that we're trying to build in terms of like interracial solidarity.
Thank you. As always, there are more questions and not enough time, but I do want to open it up to all of you guys who have been sitting with us. Yeah, any questions, any thoughts, any contributions you might want to share? I can hand you the mic. Again.
I have a question for people. How many of you have been to Peru? All right. And how many of you have family in Peru? Okay. So context, we were talking about context. It's estimated that 10% of the Peruvian population has some Chinese blood. This is how widespread it is. This is why I think it is so appealing for many Asian Americans, I'm guessing, to go to Peru to see what's going on there, you know, what's happening, because that is not the percentage that you have here. 10% is not what you have here. And yet our paths have evolved in such a different way. And now it's now just beginning to come together. Maybe thanks to technology, definitely thanks to technology. We're coming together more and sharing more. So anyway, thanks for answering my question. Now your questions.
Thank you so much for all of your contributions to this wonderful evening. It's so clear that Julia was a mentor to so many people, and I've been wondering as I've been listening to you, who were her mentors?
I think that Julia is a person who loves to continually reading and investigating all the time. But talking about writers who speak about Peru, she always mentions Yu Wen, which is the first novelist who immigrate from China when I believe that he was 8 years old and moved to Peru and studied in San Marcos, which is the heart of Peru education in many ways. And he write many novels and short stories, but La vida no es una tómbola is something is a novel where he portrays the reality of the Tusán community or the Chinese community who been living in Peru and the way that they've been segregating in so many ways, and explaining as well how was the how would I say this, the cosmovision of the Chinese Peruvian. And Julia mentioned him many times, and obviously after that I had to go and find his book, and I did it. And it was an amazing book, and obviously out of that she had great mentions like Sui Jun, which is another poet from Peru, and the contribution of many other writers from different times that I right now do not have on the top of my head. But I don't know if I can mention them as mentors, but I believe that life and experience probably was the best one of them. Yeah.
Lived like 10,000 lives. I'm not sure how you can fit all the lives and, you know, her friends all over the world, her family, and she wrote about everything and everybody. Siu Kam Wen lives in Hawaii. Up until recently worked at the Hawaii Arts Council, and he is the first published Chinese Peruvian writer. He won Iking to fame because he wrote a short story that won a national award in Peru. You know, Peru has a winner of a Nobel Literary Prize. And so Peru really prides itself in its literary history and prowess. And so Siu Kam Wen wins, and immediately people started wondering who this writer was. They could not fathom that somebody of Chinese descent could write a piece of literature in Spanish. And there he is.
Not only that, it was. I think that it was like a kind of surprise for Peruvian to say, like, who is this Asian person who can write like this? Because people continue to think that we are not from there, that we do not speak Spanish. So when the book of Siu Kam Wen came out, like it was like, are these people really educated? It was something hard to embrace.
They said it couldn't be, it must be somebody who's not Chinese Peruvian, who's pretending to be Chinese Peruvian. That's what they said. I mean, talk about imposter syndrome.
I think too, ultimately, like Nilton was saying, Julia was one who read voraciously and, you know, Peruvian, well, like, I think very influenced not just by, you know, the voices of her community, her tusán community, but also just like Peruvian letters, Latin American letters in general. There are a couple of poems in A Blind Salmon where she alludes to or dedicates the poem to, for example, Jorge Eduardo Eosun, the Peruvian poet, visual artist. The poem Reverberate, El Gallo Rojo is dedicated to Jose Watanabe, who's also another key Peruvian poet, Nikkei poet. His father was an immigrant from Japan. But yeah, I mean, she cites, you know, writers from all over. Yeah, and I guess in the way that many poets in general find mentorship on the page, that certainly was true for her as well.
I can't forget Julio Villanueva Chan, who also was mentioned by Nilton earlier. He's from our generation, and he's an editor, and he puts together the premier publication of chronicles. So a form of new fiction, I guess. And so he's well respected. And for the longest time, he was known as Julio Villanueva. And then eventually he came out as Julio Villanueva Chan to acknowledge his mother. And we're so grateful he did.
Yes.
And so he's a big figure in all of our lives and in Julia's as well, right? Isn't that where you did the video? You work with Julio and Julia.
Yeah.
There's Julio, Julia.
Any more questions?
Thanks everyone so much. This is a really beautiful panel. There's a lot of Julia to read, obviously, and the Julia that I've read has only been in Jennifer's translations, but one element of her writing that I particularly love is this sort of vein that I sense of the fantastical, the ecstatic, and sometimes almost the kind of hallucinogenic, and oftentimes that kind of ecstasy, seems like River was saying, is alongside this sense of outpourings of grief, but that sort of dichotomy that exists there. I think of my favorite poem of hers from the Blind Salmon, "The Desert Dispels," being one that I particularly think of. I'm wondering if any of you can speak to whether you also experienced this in her work, or whether how the sort of that type of fantastical or ecstatic sort of shows up in your own artistic practice.
My artistic practice is visual arts, so it's going towards more the abstract. What I do see in Julia's work is that there is a level of surrealism as well. There is a poem about a woman that was eaten by cats. Fascinating. So there's that surrealism in I know this is probably not gonna sound all that great because I'm not from the literary world myself. There is a little bit of a magical realism in some of her stuff. I don't know, would she have hated that comment? I don't know. Don't know, okay, you don't know, you won't know. But there's elements of that, I think. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll say that what I really admired about her work in Vice Royalties is that Lima and Peru are kind of characters, and they're very much alive, and they're actors. And I think one could call that like fantastical or magical realism, but I think for me, I feel like Julia experiences the world in that way. Because I also experience the world in that way. Like cities are living places because of their own histories, and the people who make them up, they're very much alive and they are actors. I think about how in Julia's work, her work is very focused on the body as well. It's corporeal to the to the place where, as you read her work, you are suddenly aware of your own flesh and bones. And it's because of that almost like an out of body experience. And I think that the grief in her work weighs so heavy that that's actually how it feels in the body. And so on the other end of it, the ecstasy, the pleasure that she writes about is also like a transcendence of that emotion and then also of the body itself. And in terms of my own work for the fantastical, I bring that into my poetry specifically when I see what is real and what is reality is almost like too heavy to always be carrying all the time, especially as like people of the global majority, the different histories that we come from, and then also what we bear witness to. Like sometimes the fantastical serves as an escape or a reimagining of current reality that like helps with coping another day or helps with connecting with a feeling other than like grief and despair.
In my experience reading, well, I love fantasy. It's well, actually, I couldn't go back after my first book to fantasy, but it's something that I keep thinking on. But even though I can say that Julia worked a lot in the image, in the picture, and try to put in your head the image more than the word understanding. And that could lead to people to think that she was writing about something fictional in poetry, but actually everything that she talked about, it was about reality, her reality, or the reality from her own point of view. So I believe that Julia was very powerful in that, and she always wanted to make it in that way. She always wanted to use. She didn't want to give to people things already bad. She wanted people to create their own image through her verses. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the elements that draws me so much to Julia's work. Like you said, Nilton, everything is so sharp. It feels like it's coming off the page and gonna pierce you, which also makes it very exciting to translate. Yeah, I think there's so many threads in her work, and they're also compelling and happen in many cases to overlap with my own readerly obsessions. Yeah, it's always really great to talk to other readers of her work and see, yeah, what they're picking up to. I think we're at time. So one more question.
What do you have?
Maybe I'll check on the Zoom if we have any questions.
No. Sorry to say, everybody's very excited and happy though.
Oh, wait. Well, this is for Jennifer. Like you've spent so much time like sitting with Julia's work and really deciding like how to bring her work to the audience that we're bringing her work to. I guess I wanted to close with asking like how have you been moved and shaped inside your work of translation of Julia's work, and also thinking of how to properly convey like her breadth and her like profundity in her work.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the central question, right? Like, how do you take what you're seeing and try to bring it out in another way with all different words and letters in different configurations. I think for me, it's been the great honor of my translating life to work with Julia's work. There's so much richness in it, and it gives me so much to hold on to as a translator in ways that are really exciting. And I think too, yeah, like I think sometimes there's, because of how publishing works in the US, there's like we can only have one book from a writer. We can only have one book from this region of the world for the year, right? But I hope to break some of that and just keep translating Julia's work because there's so much of it, and she wrote across genres. We haven't brought out very much of her fiction yet, just a little bit, and her essay writing. So yeah, I hope to, and the 2 books that we have published in English are from like 2007, 2008, and she's, has written before that, has continued to write, or had continued to write after that. So there's so much more to bring into English. Yeah, thank you for asking. With that, thanks so much, all of you, for being here with us tonight and remembering Julia. If you're interested in bringing home a piece of her work, they're the 2 books that are available in English, which are both bilingual editions actually, so they're English and Spanish, are in the back, and you can, I'm gathering donations for crowdfunding campaigns by people in Gaza. So if you Venmo me, you can take a book. Thank you so much.